I never thought a perfectly manicured lawn could feel like a prison, but in Evergreen Meadows, every blade of grass was a potential crime scene. I'm Taylor Reed, 33, marketing manager by day and apparently public enemy number one by night. My little corner house on Maple Lane looked normal enough from the street. White siding, two-car garage, the kind of place that screams responsible adult. But inside those invisible HOA lines, I was the black sheep who dared to plant a tiny herb garden along the back fence, and once left my recycling bin out an hour past the sacred 8 a.m. Pickup. Pat Langley, our beloved president, made sure the entire neighborhood knew it. Every monthly newsletter arrived like a velvet-wrapped slap. Dear residents, it would begin in her sugary font, a gentle reminder that standards keep our community shining. Then, buried on page 2, would be my name. Taylor Reed's unsightly container garden has been noted for a second time. Please comply or face the $150 fine. Neighbors would wave at the mailbox with that tight little smile, the one that said we all know you're the problem. Dear, Pat herself would cruise by in her white Lexus, window down just enough to call out, Taylor, honey, we're all family here. Families help each other look their best, don't they? Her voice dripped honey, but her eyes were ice. Lauren, her daughter, was the golden child incarnate. 28, flawless skin, a social media empire built on clean living and mindful minimalism. Her Instagram was a parade of sponsored athleisure and filtered sunset from the community pool she somehow always had first dibs on. Pat never missed a chance to compare. At the last block party, mandatory attendance. Of course, Pat cornered me by the punch bowl while Lauren posed for selfies. Look at my girl, Taylor. She gets it. That's why her yard passed inspection with flying colors last month. You can learn a lot from her work ethic. Lauren flashed that influencer smile. All teeth and zero warmth. Mom's right. A little discipline goes a long way. I smile back. The same plastic curve I perfected over 6 years of living here. And swallowed the rage like cheap wine. It wasn't always this bad. Mrs. Eleanor Grant, the sweet widow 3 doors down, had been my quiet lifeline. She loved my herb garden, said the basil reminded her of her grandmother's kitchen in Italy. We'd sit on her porch with iced tea while she told stories of the old days before the HOA turned everything into a police state. Eleanor was the one who encouraged my side hustle. You're too smart to let these busybodies dim your light. Taylor, when she passed peacefully last spring, the whole neighborhood showed up for the memorial in matching black dresses Pat had suggested. I cried real tears. Pat gave a eulogy about community values that made my stomach turn. Then came the will reading at the community center. The room smelled of lemon polish and entitlement. Mr. Peterson, the lawyer, cleared his throat and read the usual bits. House to distant relatives, some jewelry here and there. Then the part I've been clinging to like a life raft. To my dear neighbor Taylor Reed, I leave the sum of $25,000 to be used for her proposed community sustainable garden project as she sees fit. A warm flush hit me. Eleanor had remembered every conversation, every dream I'd whispered about turning the empty lot behind the tennis courts into something green and useful instead of another parking pad. That money will buy raised beds, irrigation, maybe even pay a couple of kids in the neighborhood to help. Pat's face stayed perfectly composed, but her fingers tightened on her leather binder. There seems to be an amendment, Mr. Peterson said, frowning at the fresh page, dated just 2 weeks before Eleanor's hospitalization. It redirects the funds to Lauren Langley for her community wellness pavilion expansion for her greater need and potential. The room went graveyard quiet. My heart slammed against my ribs. That can't be right, I whispered. Eleanor had promised me specifically. Pat leaned forward, voice smooth as silk. Eleanor changed her mind. Taylor. She saw how Lauren's vision would benefit everyone. Don't make this awkward. Dear, we're all family. Lauren's glossy lips curled. Some people just know how to make things happen. Taylor. Others well. I felt every eye on me. The same pitying stares I'd endured at every HOA meeting for years. I stood, legs steady only by sheer will, and walked out into the Colorado sunshine. Sitting in my 8-year-old Honda, another source of Pat's gentle mockery, I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel and let the pieces click. 6 years of fines, public shaming, and suggestions that cost me thousands. The $8,000 I'd quietly fronted for last year's holiday lights when the HOA Treasury came up short, never repaid. Of course, the way they'd gaslit me into thinking I was the difficult one. Something inside me snapped clean in two. No more playing the good neighbor. No more swallowing it. What none of them knew, what I'd buried deeper than my herb garden, was that Taylor Reed, the problem resident, had been quietly building an empire. Verdant Edge Marketing wasn't just a side gig. It was a 7-figure boutique agency specializing in sustainable brands. I'd started in my spare bedroom 4 years ago, taking on one organic skincare client at a time. Sales exploded. Referrals snowballed. By the time Eleanor passed, I had 15 premium clients, 3 remote employees, and a net worth north of $2.8 million. I also held silent stakes in 3 local farm-to-table restaurants that were printing money and co-owned a patented analytics dashboard that brought in 6 figures a year in royalties. The modest house, the sensible car, the off-the-rack clothes, they were camouflage. I'd learned the hard way that flashing success in this neighborhood got you targeted, not celebrated. But the performance was over. I drove home that afternoon, declined Pat's sugary text about staying for coffee to talk it out, and started a new folder on my laptop titled Evergreen Truth. It was time to document everything. The next 9 months became a masterclass in patience and paperwork. I played the part perfectly, paid every new fine without complaint, kept my garden in regulation-sized pots, even volunteered to help set up the annual Easter egg hunt so Pat could coo about my growth. All while my hidden camera app recorded every board meeting I could slip into, and my forensic accountant friend quietly examined the amendment. The signature on Eleanor's change of heart was shaky, dated the exact day she'd been pumped full of pain meds in the hospital. My cousin Emma, an estate lawyer in Boulder, introduced me to a document expert who confirmed it off the record. Forgery, plain and simple. I also dug deeper into the HOA finances. Turns out the community fund wasn't the only thing Pat and Lauren had their hands in. Emails I obtained through a friendly board member who owed me a favor showed Pat redirecting dues to pay for Lauren-sponsored wellness retreats and approving rule changes that conveniently benefited their properties while fining everyone else. The $15,000 I'd loaned the HOA for emergency tree trimming 2 years ago never repaid, just like the holiday lights. Bank statements proved it. I printed everything, time-stamped it, and stored copies in 3 different safe deposit boxes. Meanwhile, the petty attacks kept coming, each one more ridiculous than the last. My lawn was too green 1 month, yes. Really. Pat's newsletter claimed my fertilizer choice violated some obscure environmental clause she'd invented on the spot. At the summer potluck, Lauren cornered me by the grill. Mom says you're finally learning. Taylor, that's so inspiring. Maybe next year you can help with my content calendar. Exposure is better than money, right? I smiled. The same dead-eyed smile I'd given for years. I'll think about it. Lauren, inside, I was counting the days until the gala. Pat's annual Leadership Awards Gala was the crown jewel of the HOA calendar. This year, it was bigger than ever, celebrating Lauren as Rising Star Resident of the Decade with a black tie event at the Grandview Community Center. 200 guests, local news, even a string quartet. Pat had personally invited me in that syrupy voice. We'd love for you to be there. Taylor. Shows you've turned over a new leaf. I RSVP'd immediately and offered to help with AV setup. She was delighted. My boss at the agency, Sarah, one of the few who knew my double life, laughed when I told her the plan. You're about to burn the whole thing down. I'll bring popcorn. I spent the weeks leading up to the gala curating the perfect presentation. The original tribute video Pat commissioned was a sappy montage of Lauren's greatest hits, yoga poses by the pool, ribbon cuttings for the wellness pavilion that Eleanor's money was secretly funding. I replaced it with something far more educational. Bank transfers. Screenshots of texts where Pat bragged to Lauren about handling that Reed woman. The forensic report on Eleanor's signature. And, at the very end, a sleek slide deck of Verdant Edge marketing, client logos, revenue charts climbing like rockets, my patent certificate, and the final number, $2.8 million net worth. The night of the gala arrived with Colorado mountain air crisp and the ballroom glittering under crystal chandeliers. I walked in wearing a custom black dress that cost more than Pat believed I made in a year. Heads turned. Pat's eyes widened for half a second before her smile snapped back into place. Taylor, you clean up nicely. Almost like you belong. Lauren floated by in sequence, already practicing her acceptance speech. I nodded politely and made my way to the AV booth. The technician, someone I'd quietly paid triple to look the other way, gave me a thumbs up. Everything was wired. The evening unfolded like a bad movie I'd seen coming for months. Speeches praising Pat's visionary leadership and Lauren's inspirational journey. Pat's toast. To my daughter, who never settles for mediocrity and always puts community first. Her eyes flicked to me on the word never. I kept smiling, checking my watch. At exactly 8:15 p.m., as the program promised a special video tribute, the lights dimmed. The screen lit up with the family photo everyone expected. Then it dissolved into the first screenshot, Pat's email to the board treasurer 2 days after Eleanor's death. Transfer the Reed funds quietly. Lauren's pavilion needs it more. Taylor would just waste it on flowers nobody will notice anyway. A ripple of whispers swept the room. Pat's face drained of color. The next slide hit harder. My $15,000 loan never repaid. Followed by the forged amendment report. Lauren's voice cracked from the front table. This is fake. Mom, make it stop. I stood up slowly, walking to the center of the dance floor as the screen kept rolling. My voice carried clear and calm through the suddenly silent ballroom. There's been a slight change of programming tonight. This isn't the tribute you ordered. This is the truth. The screen kept playing like a greatest hits album of betrayal. Bank statements glowing 20 feet tall. Texts where Lauren bragged to her followers about that extra budget mom scored while tagging her Bali wellness retreat. The forensic experts' side-by-side comparison of Eleanor's real signature versus the shaky forgery. Gasps turned into outright murmurs. Someone in the back actually dropped a champagne flute. Pat rose from her seat, pearls clutched, voice trembling with that practiced dignity she wielded like a weapon. Taylor, this is completely inappropriate. We can discuss this privately like adults. I didn't move. No more private discussions. Pat, no more pretending we're one big happy community while you rewrite wills and pocket money mint for everyone. Eleanor wanted that garden for the kids, for the neighborhood, not another selfie backdrop for your daughter. Lauren stood too, mascara already running. You're ruining my night. This is sick. You need help. I smiled. The first real one in years. Actually, I'm just getting started. The final slides hit like a freight train. Verdant Edge Marketing's client list, major sustainable brands everyone in the room recognized. Revenue graphs climbing straight up. My restaurant partnerships. The patent. And the kicker, my personal financial statement showing $2.8 million net worth. The room went dead silent. You could almost hear the mental math as neighbors recalculated everything they thought they knew about poor Taylor with the ugly herb garden. Pat's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "You've been lying to us all this time?" "No," I said, voice steady. "I was protecting myself from you." "There's a difference." I nodded toward the side entrance. Two process servers in dark suits stepped into the light, envelopes in hand. "I filed suit this morning for $500,000 against you, Pat, Lauren, and the HOA board for fraud, misappropriation, and forgery. These gentlemen have the papers." Thought it would be efficient to deliver them while the whole neighborhood was conveniently gathered. Chaos erupted beautifully. Lauren collapsed into theatrical sobs, smearing her perfect makeup across her sequins. Pat tried to grab my arm, nails digging in. "How dare you do this to your community?" I stepped back calmly. "This community did it to itself the day you decided rules only applied to people you didn't like." One elderly resident, Mr. Hargrove from the end of the block, stood up slowly. "I always wondered where that tree trimming money went." "Pat, you told us the treasury was empty." Another neighbor pulled out her phone and started recording. The local lifestyle reporter who'd been invited for the fluff piece was now scribbling furiously. Pat's carefully curated image cracked right there under the chandeliers. She sputtered about misunderstandings and alternative facts, but the room had already chosen sides. Some slipped out the back doors muttering excuses. Others approached me with quiet apologies and hesitant questions. A few die-hard loyalists clustered around Pat and Lauren like a human shield, but even they looked uneasy. The string quartet packed up without being asked. I walked out of that ballroom with my head high, ignoring Pat's tearful pleas about what you're doing to the neighborhood. In the parking lot, I finally exhaled. Years have swallowed while leaving my lungs. The performance was over. The real show had just begun. The lawsuit moved faster than anyone expected. Their attorney reached out within 2 weeks begging for settlement talks. I refused any confidentiality clause. I wanted every detail public record. The story hit the local news that same weekend. HOA president accused of forgery in shocking community scandal. Pat's carefully managed Facebook group exploded with comments she couldn't delete fast enough. Lauren lost 40,000 followers in 48 hours. Sponsors started dropping her like hot coals, citing values misalignment. The board called an emergency meeting and voted to suspend Pat pending investigation. For the first time in 6 years, my herb garden received a glowing compliance notice instead of a fine. Small victories tasted sweetest. I decided a fresh start was in order, but on my terms. I relocated Verdant Edge's main office to a bright loft downtown, expanded the team, and launched a line of community garden starter kits under a new sister brand. The $25,000 Eleanor had meant for me finally went where it belonged, into the very garden project I dreamed of, now fully funded by my own money and volunteer labor from neighbors who'd finally opened their eyes. I bought a modest house just outside the HOA lines with a view of the mountains and room for the 2 rescue dogs I adopted the week after the gala. Life felt lighter, freer. Pat tried the usual moves, tearful emails oscillating between threats and olive branches, passive-aggressive neighborhood mailers about unity. I read them, archived them, and kept living. Lauren moved back in with her mother after her influencer income dried up and took a retail job at the mall, honest work that required actual effort, the kind she used to mock. The marriage between Pat and her husband quietly dissolved in the divorce filings that followed. Apparently, the united front had been paper thin. Most surprisingly, some real relationships bloomed from the wreckage. Mr. Hargrove became a regular at my new garden plots, teaching kids how to compost. Cousin Emma and I started weekly hikes. Even a few former critics sent quiet thank you notes for exposing what they'd been afraid to say. At a sustainability conference in Denver, I met Alex Rivera, founder of an ethical landscaping firm. Our shared values clicked instantly, professional first, then something warmer over sunset coffees. "You know what I love about you?" he told me one evening on my new deck. "You're real. No games. No performance." I smiled, thinking of the long road that led here. Took me a while to get there. Sometimes I still dream about that gala night. The stunned faces, Pat's pearls trembling, Lauren's mascara rivers. I wake up not with smug satisfaction, but with a complicated mix of vindication and sadness for what the neighborhood could have been if they'd simply treated people fairly. Then I look at my garden, thriving, the dogs snoring at my feet, Alex's text lighting up my phone, and I know the choice was right. Standing up isn't about revenge. It's about refusing to shrink anymore. Eleanor's real gift wasn't the money. It was the permission to value myself enough to walk away from people who never did. In the end, that was the greatest freedom of all. The days after the gala blurred into a satisfying whirlwind of consequences and quiet triumphs. The HOA board, now under new temporary leadership, voted unanimously to reform the bylaws. No more retroactive rule changes. No more secret fund redirects. Fines were capped and required documented proof. My herb garden became the unofficial poster child for approved community enhancements. Pat's name was quietly removed from every plaque and newsletter. She still lived in the neighborhood. Of course, HOAs don't evict their own presidents overnight, but the power was gone. Neighbors who once crossed the street to avoid me now waved with genuine smiles. Lauren's fall from grace was almost poetic. Her carefully curated feed filled with damage control posts that only made things worse. Lessons in authenticity, she called them, but the comments roasted her alive. Sponsors fled. Brand deals evaporated. The last I heard, she was working doubles at the local Target, learning the kind of discipline she used to lecture me about. Chad, her equally polished boyfriend, ghosted within weeks, citing reputational concerns. Symmetry at its finest. Pat tried one last Hail Mary. She showed up at my new office unannounced. Pearls still in place. Voice trembling with practiced remorse. "Taylor, we were like family. Can't we put this behind us?" I looked at her, the woman who'd spent years making me feel small, and felt nothing but calm. Family doesn't forge wills. Pat, family doesn't steal from the dead. We're not family. We never were. She left without another word. I never heard from her again. I poured the energy I used to spend surviving into building something better. The community garden Eleanor had envisioned broke ground that fall. Kids from the neighborhood showed up every Saturday, learning about soil and seeds and the simple joy of growing your own basil without fear of fines. Mr. Hargrove became my unofficial co-director. We even got a small grant from the city, thanks to the publicity. Verdant Edge expanded into 3 new states, and my team grew to 8. The royalties from the analytics tool kept rolling in, giving me the freedom to work on passion projects instead of just survival. Alex and I grew closer with every hike and every late-night strategy session. He never asked for the full gala story until I was ready to tell it. When I finally did, over wine on my deck with the dogs at our feet, he simply nodded. "You didn't just get even. You got free. That's rarer." He was right. The greatest revenge wasn't the lawsuit or the public humiliation. It was waking up every morning without that constant knot of dread in my stomach. It was planting whatever I wanted in my yard. It was laughing without calculating who might be watching. Extended family relationships shifted too. Emma and I vacationed together in the mountains that winter. A few former neighbors who'd stayed silent during the worst years reached out with genuine apologies and invitations to barbecues. The toxic core was gone. What remained felt lighter, more real. Even Pat's remaining loyalists eventually drifted away once the legal bills started piling up. The divorce proceedings dragged on with ugly accusations flying both ways. Turns out the perfect power couple had been masking deep cracks for years. I still receive the occasional email from Pat, alternating between bitter blame and awkward attempts at reconciliation. I read them, archive them, and keep living. The garden is blooming now, tomatoes heavy on the vines, kids laughing between the beds. Eleanor would have loved it. Sometimes I sit on the bench we dedicated in her name and feel a quiet thank you settle in my chest. She gave me the spark. The rest I built myself. Looking back, the $25,000 was never the point. It was the moment I stopped shrinking to fit their rules. The moment I chose to value myself enough to fight back with facts instead of fear. Standing up for yourself isn't vindictive. Sometimes it's the only way to become who you were always meant to be. The neighborhood is still standing, lawn still perfect, but the air feels different now. Freer. And somewhere in that freedom, the real community finally grew. Months turned into a year, and Evergreen Meadows settled into its new rhythm. Less fear, more actual neighborliness. The garden became a weekend gathering spot where people brought coffee and stories instead of complaints. Pat sold her house quietly and moved to a retirement community 2 states away. The newsletter ran a short, neutral farewell that fooled no one. Lauren tried one last comeback video titled, "My Journey to True Growth," but it flopped harder than her previous excuses. The algorithm had moved on, and so had everyone else. I kept the house in the old neighborhood as a rental and lived in my new place full-time. The dogs loved the bigger yard. Alex and I planted our own small herb garden together. Basil, of course, in honor of Eleanor. Work thrived. Verdant Edge signed 3 new national clients, and I started mentoring young entrepreneurs who reminded me of the version of myself I used to hide. The patent royalties funded scholarships for neighborhood kids interested in sustainable design. Every time I wrote one of those checks, I felt the circle complete. The lawsuit settled out of court for a number that more than covered everything stolen plus legal fees. I donated a portion back into the garden fund and used the rest to expand my mentoring program. No confidentiality agreement. The public record stayed public. A quiet warning to anyone else tempted to play God with other people's lives. Local news ran a follow-up piece 6 months later. HOA scandal leads to community renaissance. They interviewed Mr. Hargrove, who smiled at the camera and said, "Sometimes it takes one brave person to remind the rest of us what community actually means." I watched it once, then turned off the TV and went outside to pull weeds. Dreams still come occasionally, the gala lights, the stunned faces, Pat's voice cracking on the word family. I wake up, breathe, and look around at the life I built instead of the one they try to script for me. No more pretending, no more shrinking, just me, my work, my people, and the garden growing exactly the way Eleanor imagined. The inheritance she intended turned out to be worth far more than $25,000. It was the permission to stop performing and start living. In the end, the most powerful thing you can do isn't getting even. It's getting free. And I finally, completely, was.